You think you know Marilyn Monroe? Come on, say the name. What pops into your head? That shock of platinum blonde hair, a smile that could melt glaciers, maybe that breathy come-hither voice that sounded like champagne bubbling over. Sure, all that. But is that the whole story? Not even close. She was, let's be honest, the blueprint for the term blonde bombshell, a dizzying cocktail of devastating innocence and knockout allure. Even standing still, the woman radiated a kind of magnetic energy that just pulled you in. You couldn't look away. But peel back the layers of Hollywood gloss, the diamonds, and that iconic white dress having its subway great moment, and you find someone infinitely more complex. You find a young woman named Norma Jeane, desperately searching for something. The Klieg lights and adoring crowds could never quite provide. Real, unconditional love and acceptance. Trust me, this story's got more twists than a film noir plotline and more heart than you might expect. From the roles that made the world swoon in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes to the haunting vulnerability she laid bare in The Misfits, her journey wasn't just about chasing fame. It was a relentless quest to find a place where she truly belonged, to find a love that didn't come with conditions or contracts. She was the woman men adored and women, well, maybe secretly wanted to be, or at least raid her closet. So grab your popcorn, settle in, and let's pull back the velvet curtain on one of Hollywood's brightest and perhaps loneliest stars. This is the story of the Marilyn behind the myth. What's your first thought when you hear the name Marilyn Monroe? A favorite movie, a specific image? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We really want to know. All right, let's rewind. Way back before the platinum hair, the wiggle walk, and the affair rumors that could fill volumes. We need to go back to the beginning, to Los Angeles, California, June 1st, 1926. That's when Norma Jeane Mortensen entered the world. Though you'll usually see her listed as Norma Jean Baker, the Mortensen part came from her mother's estranged second husband, whose name was on the birth certificate, but his actual paternity, highly doubtful. The Baker part came later from her mother's first husband. Confusing. Welcome to Norma Jean's early life. Stability wasn't exactly in the cards. Her mother, Gladys Pearl Baker, was a film cutter for RKO Pictures, a job right. In the heart of the dream factory, Norma Jeane would later conquer. Gladys was, by all accounts, a striking woman, beautiful even, but she carried a heavy burden. Mental illness ran in her family, like a dark, unwelcome heirloom, and Gladys herself wrestled with severe emotional and psychological problems throughout her life. Think of a beauty as fragile as a butterfly's wing, paired with a mind constantly battling an internal storm. It meant she was often unable to care for her daughter, physically present but emotionally adrift, or sometimes not present at all. And the father? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Gladys was separated from Martin Mortensen when Norma Jeane was conceived, and she later claimed her real father was a man named Charles Stanley Gifford, a co-worker at RKO. Whether it was true or just a desperate wish, we'll likely never know for sure. Gifford never publicly acknowledged her, leaving a gaping hole of uncertainty in Norma Jeane's identity, a constant whisper of, "Who am I, really?" that would echo throughout her life. Imagine growing up with that fundamental piece of your story just missing. It's like trying to build a house on shifting sand. With Gladys frequently institutionalized or simply unable to cope, Norma Jeane's childhood became a dizzying carousel of foster homes and orphanages. She rarely stayed in one place for long. There were brief, hopeful periods, living with family friends like Albert and Ida Belenda, who provided some early structure, or later with Gladys's friend Grace Goddard and her husband. But inevitably, circumstances would change, Gladys would have another breakdown, foster parents would move or face their own hardships, and Norma Jeane would be uprooted again. Can you picture it? constantly packing your meager belongings, saying goodbye to temporary siblings and caregivers, always the new kid, always feeling like an outsider looking in. It wasn't a childhood, it was more like a game of human hot potato, where she was the potato nobody could hold on to for very long. As Marilyn herself would later reflect, with a characteristic blend of sadness and understatement, "I never felt I belonged anywhere." There were no real siblings sharing this chaotic journey. While Gladys had 2 children from her first marriage, they were raised by their father after the divorce and had little contact with Norma Jeane during her formative years. She was essentially alone, navigating this turbulent landscape without the anchor of consistent family ties. Early photos show a shy, brown-haired girl with a tentative smile, eyes that hinted at a watchfulness beyond her years. There wasn't much foreshadowing of the global sex symbol she'd become, just a vulnerability, a sense of waiting for the other shoe to drop. There are poignant, almost bizarre stories from this time that highlight Gladys's volatile love. One famous anecdote involves Gladys, during a period when she was out of the hospital, trying to essentially kidnap a young Norma Jeane from a foster home by stuffing her into a duffel bag. It sounds like something out of a dark comedy, but beneath the absurdity lies a mother's desperate, fractured love and a child's terrifying helplessness. Gladys apparently believed people were trying to harm Norma Jeane, and this was her way of saving her. It's a stark illustration of the instability that was Norma Jeane's baseline reality, love and danger intertwined in a way that must have been profoundly confusing. It's no wonder she spent her life searching for a love that felt safe, secure, and real. The foundation just wasn't there. A former caregiver reportedly said something along the lines of, "That child craved affection like a flower craves sunlight, but she learned early on that clouds could gather without warning." So how does a kid survive that kind of emotional whiplash? For Norma Jeane, the answer often lay in the flickering magic of the silver screen. With her mother frequently institutionalized, a harsh reality that cemented a deep-seated fear of abandonment and life in foster care feeling transient and unpredictable, the local movie theater became her sanctuary. It was a place where, for a few precious hours, she could escape the chaos and lose herself in worlds far removed from her own troubles. Facing the brutal truth that the person you love most, your own mother, simply cannot be there for you. Well, that leaves a scar that doesn't easily fade, doesn't it? It plants a seed of profound insecurity. Inside the darkened theater, however, Norma Jeane wasn't the lonely foster kid. She was transported. She devoured the images on screen, particularly drawn to the glamorous leading ladies of the era. Jean Harlow, the original platinum blonde bombshell, became an early obsession. Harlow represented everything Norma Jeane wasn't: confident, adored, seemingly untouchable. You can just picture young Norma Jeane perched in her seat, mesmerized, dreaming of a world where she too could be bathed in that golden light, admired, desired, and perhaps, most importantly, seen. She wasn't just watching movies, she was absorbing blueprints for a different kind of life, a life where she held the power, where she was the one people couldn't take their eyes off. Friends and foster family members later recalled her spending hours in front of mirrors, mimicking the expressions and poses of her favorite stars. There are tales, perhaps embellished over time, but capturing a kernel of truth about her early fascination with Harlow's iconic hair color. Legend has it she was so fixated on achieving that same ethereal blonde that she experimented with, well, let's just say, household chemicals were likely involved, much to the horror of her caregivers. It wasn't just vanity. It was about transformation, about shedding the skin of the unwanted Norma Jeane and trying on the persona of someone glamorous, someone loved. It was an early, instinctive grasp for control in a life that felt utterly out of her control. As she moved into her teenage years, this awareness of appearance began to sharpen. Living in the shadow of Hollywood, even on its less glamorous fringes, beauty was currency. Norma Jeane started experimenting, a touch of lipstick borrowed or bought with saved pennies, a different way of styling her hair, a shy glance held a second longer than necessary. It wasn't overt yet, but the seeds of the future Marilyn were undeniably sprouting. The shy girl was learning that how she looked could influence how people treated her, a lesson both empowering and potentially dangerous. She started to understand that appearance could be a tool, a way to get noticed, maybe even a way to feel less invisible. The movies weren't just escapism, they were education. They taught her about glamour, about persona, about the power of image. Marilyn herself later reflected on this period, saying something to the effect of, "In the darkness of the movie theater, I could dream anything. There, I didn't have to be Norma Jeane. It was in those dreams, fueled by Hollywood fantasies and born from childhood insecurity, that the relentless search for love and acceptance truly took root. She craved the adoration showered upon the stars, believing perhaps that universal fame could somehow fill the void left by unstable family love. If the whole world loved her, surely that would be enough." It was a question that would drive her entire adult life, a quest born in the lonely shadows of Los Angeles movie houses. Norma Jeane came of age against a backdrop that was itself a study in contrasts. Los Angeles during the late 1930s and early 1940s. This was the era of the Great Depression, slowly giving way to the anxieties and industrial boom of World War II. LA wasn't just any city. It was the glittering, often ruthless capital of the American dream machine, Hollywood. A place where fortunes were made overnight, stars were born under Klieg lights, and illusions were manufactured daily. But just beyond the studio gates, life for ordinary Angelenos was often far from glamorous. It was a city teeming with opportunity, yes, but also rife with competition and potential pitfalls. Imagine growing up right there, breathing the same air as Clark Gable and Bette Davis, seeing the searchlights sweep the sky for movie premieres, constantly bombarded by images of perfection and success. Hollywood's manufactured glamour stood in stark contrast to the economic realities faced by many. LA back then? It was a place where dreams were packaged and sold like oranges, but only a lucky few ever hit the jackpot. For a young woman like Norma Jeane, bouncing between homes and struggling for stability, the allure must have been almost overwhelming. Who wouldn't want a piece of that shiny, seemingly perfect world? Social norms for women were still quite rigid, emphasizing marriage and domesticity. Yet the war years also brought unexpected shifts. With men away fighting, women stepped into roles previously closed to them, particularly in factories supporting the war effort. This created a strange dichotomy. The expectation to be demure and domestic on one hand, and the newfound reality of female capability and independence in the workforce on the other. It was within this wartime context that Norma Jeane found herself not sipping cocktails at Kiro's, but working on an assembly line. After a brief early marriage, designed partly to avoid being sent back to an orphanage, she took a job at the radio plane company in Van Nuys in 1944. Her task? Inspecting parachutes and spraying airplane fuselages with fire retardant. Picture it, the future goddess of the silver screen, dressed in practical work overalls, ensuring the safety of unmanned drone aircraft. It's about as far from the Hollywood fantasy as you can get. This period starkly highlights the contrast between her everyday reality, mundane, essential wartime work, and the soaring ambition simmering beneath the surface. From checking parachutes to gracing magazine covers, talk about a career leap even. Hollywood screenwriters might find improbable. Her look during this time reflected her circumstances. Photos show a vibrant, naturally pretty young woman with curly brown hair, often tied back for work, looking healthy and capable. There's a freshness, an unstylized quality completely different from the meticulously crafted image of Marilyn Monroe. She was Norma Jeane Dougherty, the relatable Rosie the Riveter type, doing her part for the war effort, and then came the moment that changed everything. Call it fate, call it luck, call it pure Hollywood kismet. In late 1944 or early 1945, an army photographer named David Conover was sent to the radioplane factory by his commanding officer, none other than Captain Ronald Reagan, to shoot pictures of women contributing to the war effort for Yank magazine. His lens found Norma Jeane. Conover was immediately struck by her photogenic quality, her natural charisma, even amidst the noisy factory floor. He reportedly told her she should be a model. He'd come looking for morale-boosting propaganda shots and stumbled upon the future queen of Hollywood assembling drone parts. You couldn't make this stuff up. That chance encounter planted a seed. Modeling seemed like a possible stepping stone, a path out of the factory and maybe, just maybe, towards that dazzling world she'd only dreamed of from a darkened movie theater seat. The transition wouldn't be instant, but the first domino had tipped. Norma Jeane, the factory girl, was about to take her first tentative step towards becoming Marilyn Monroe. David Conover's suggestion wasn't just hot air, it ignited something in Norma Jeane. Modeling, it sounded a world away from spraying fuselage sealant. Encouraged by Conover, she signed up with the Blue Book Model Agency in August 1945. And guess what? She was a natural. Maybe all those hours studying movie magazines and mimicking poses in front of the mirror paid off. She quickly became one of the agency's most successful models, gracing covers of countless Cheesecake and Men's magazines. Let's clarify that term. Pin-up girl. In the 1940s, pin-ups were images designed to be literally pinned up on walls, wholesome yet alluring pictures that soldiers overseas, mechanics in garages, and college kids in dorms adored. Norma Jeane learned fast that a strategically deployed smile, an innocent gaze paired with a figure-hugging sweater or bathing suit, could open doors, or at least land you on the cover of Peek or Laugh. She diligently studied the craft, learning about lighting, angles, and how to project personality through a still photograph. She also made a pivotal decision that would define her look forever. She started bleaching her naturally brown hair, first honey blonde, then lighter and lighter still, until she reached that iconic, almost incandescent platinum blonde. This wasn't just a whim, it was a calculated move. Blonde suggested fun, glamour, maybe a touch of approachable danger, everything the studio seemed to be looking for. That bottle blonde wasn't merely a hair color change. It was a declaration of intent. It was the construction of a persona, a promise of allure, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of trouble. Her modeling success caught the eye of Hollywood scouts. In 1946, after a screen test arranged by Ben Lyon, a former actor turned casting director at 20th Century Fox, she landed her first studio contract. It was Lyon who, feeling Norma Jean Baker lacked star quality, suggested a new name. They played around with options, eventually settling on Marilyn combined with her mother's maiden name, Monroe. And just like that, stepping through the studio gates, Norma Jeane effectively ceased to exist in the public eye. She entered a metaphorical phone booth as a hard-working model and emerged as Marilyn Monroe, a name that just sounded like starlight and success. The studio system in the 40s was like a star-making factory. They put Marilyn through the paces, acting lessons, dancing lessons, singing lessons. They taught her how to walk, how to talk, how to apply that distinctive makeup, the sleepy, sultry eyes, the emphasized Cupid's bow. They were molding her into their vision of a starlet. One persistent rumor, which she never confirmed but coyly played along with, was that she had one heel slightly shaved down on her shoes to enhance her famous hip-swaying walk. True or not, it added to the mystique. She moved as if she were carrying the world's most delightful secret in the sway of her hips. Her actual film debut, however, was less than auspicious. Her first credited role was a tiny part in the 1947 film Dangerous Years. Blink and you'd miss her. Then came Scudder Who, Scudder Hey in 1948. She filmed a few scenes, had one line, and even got to paddle a canoe. The final cut? Most of her scenes hit the cutting room floor, leaving her visible for mere seconds, a fleeting glimpse in a canoe. It was a classic Hollywood introduction, hyped up then barely there. Talk about an anticlimax. But hey, everyone's got to start somewhere, right? Even future icons get left on the editing room floor initially. Despite the slow start on screen, Vox dropped her contract after a year. She briefly signed with Columbia Pictures, where she met her first important acting coach, Natasha Lytess, who would remain a significant, if sometimes controlling, influence for years. At Columbia, she starred in a low-budget musical, Ladies, of the Chorus 1948, where she actually got to sing and have a leading role, albeit in a B picture. Still, no breakthrough. Contracts expired, prospects dimmed. Then came a moment of financial desperation in 1949. Broke, behind on rent, and facing the harsh reality of needing cash now, she posed nude for photographer Tom Kelly. The resulting photographs, featuring Marilyn sprawled artfully on red velvet, were sold for calendar illustrations under titles like Golden Dreams. She was paid a flat fee, $50. It was a decision born of necessity, a choice between paying the bills and, well, keeping her clothes on. She chose the former. At the time, it seemed like a risky but necessary gamble. Little did she know those photos would come back to haunt her and, paradoxically, help solidify her fame just a few years later. Through these early years, bouncing between studios, bit parts, and modeling gigs, Marilyn displayed a tenacious drive. People who worked with her then often mentioned her ambition, her willingness to learn, and a deep-seated hunger to succeed. An early photographer or coach might have remarked something like, "She had this incredible thirst to learn, almost a desperation, as if her whole life depended on getting it right." It was this relentless determination, coupled with that undeniable photogenic quality and the careful construction of the Marilyn persona, that kept her in the game, waiting for the roles that would finally make Hollywood and the world sit up and take notice. The fuse had been lit, it just needed the right spark. The spark finally ignited in 1950. After impressing agent Johnny Hyde, who became a fervent champion, Marilyn landed two small but incredibly impactful roles that put her firmly on the map. First came John Huston's gritty crime drama, The Asphalt Jungle. She played Angela Finlay, the naive, much younger mistress of a crooked lawyer. Though her screen time was limited, her presence was electric. She exuded a vulnerability and sensuality that stole every scene she was in. You couldn't help but watch her. Then lightning struck twice the same year with Joseph L. Mankiewicz's sophisticated masterpiece, All About Eve. Cast as Miss Caswell, an aspiring actress described by George Sanders' acid-tongued critic Addison. DeWitt as a graduate of the Copacabana School of Dramatic Art, Marilyn held her own against screen veterans like Bette Davis and Anne Baxter. Again, it was a supporting role, essentially playing a ditzy blonde stereotype, but she did it with such charm and comedic flair that she became utterly memorable. Just a few minutes on screen in these two high-profile films, and suddenly everyone was asking, who is that girl? The major studios, including her old stomping ground 20th Century Fox, definitely noticed. They quickly signed her to a new, more substantial 7-year contract. The era of bit parts was officially over. Fox began grooming her for stardom, casting her in a string of comedies and dramas designed to showcase her burgeoning appeal. Films like As Young as You Feel 1951 and Monkey Business 1952, opposite Carrie, Grant and Ginger Rogers, solidified her comedic talents. Don't Bother to Knock 1952 gave her a chance at a more dramatic role as a disturbed babysitter, hinting at a depth beyond the bubbly facade. But it was 1953 that truly launched Marilyn into the stratosphere. First came Niagara, a technicolor noir thriller where she played Rose Loomis, a seductive femme fatale plotting to murder her older, jealous husband. This film cemented her image as a sex symbol. There's a famous scene where she's filmed walking, away from the camera, a long, deliberate shot emphasizing her signature wiggle. That walk in Niagara, it wasn't just walking, it felt like a minor seismic event. The posters screamed, Marilyn Monroe and Niagara, a raging torrent of emotion that even nature can't control. Subtle, right? Then she hit the absolute jackpot with Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Teamed up with the equally stunning Jane Russell, Marilyn played Lorelei Lee, the quintessential gold-digging showgirl with a heart of, well, maybe gold-plated. Bronze? It was the role she seemed born to play, perfectly blending wide-eyed innocence with mercenary calculation and irresistible charm. Her comedic timing was impeccable, and her musical numbers were showstoppers. The performance of Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, with Marilyn in that iconic pink satin gown, surrounded by adoring men, became instantly legendary. It's etched into cinematic history. This film didn't just make Marilyn a superstar, it practically taught the world that diamonds are indeed a girl's best friend, or at least Lorelei Lee's. It defined the dumb blonde persona she would both embrace and struggle against for the rest of her career. She followed this triumph immediately with How to Marry a Millionaire 1953, sharing top billing with Lauren Bacall and Betty Grable, playing the delightfully myopic Paula Debevoise, who famously refuses to wear glasses because men aren't attentive to girls who wear glasses. Marilyn once again proved her comedic chops and cemented her status as a top box office draw. 3 massive hits in 1 year. Marilyn Monroe was no longer just a star. She was a phenomenon. Her cultural impact was immense. She redefined Hollywood glamour and sexuality for the conservative 1950s. Her curves were celebrated, her breathy voice imitated, her platinum hair copied. She became the embodiment of the American dream, the ultimate fantasy figure. Men desired her, women envied or admired her. She wasn't just an actress, she was becoming an icon. Behind the scenes, her relationships with directors were sometimes complex. Billy Wilder, who would later direct her in 2 classics, famously quipped about the difficulties of working with her. He allegedly said, "Directing Marilyn was like pulling teeth, but the end result was often worth the agony and frustration." He acknowledged her unique screen magic, even while tearing his hair out over her notorious lack of punctuality and insecurity on set. In contrast, she formed a genuine friendship with her Gentlemen Prefer Blondes co-star, Jane Russell. Russell saw beyond the bombshell image, later stating, "She was far more intelligent than people gave her credit for. That dumb blonde routine was part of the act." Anecdotes from this period paint a picture of immense pressure and burgeoning diva behavior, often stemming from deep insecurity. Stories circulated about her being hours late to set, needing countless takes, relying heavily on her coach, Natasha Lytess. Yet, when the cameras rolled and Marilyn finally clicked, the results were undeniable. Directors and crew might have wanted to strangle her while waiting, but when she delivered that perfect take, radiating vulnerability or effervescent charm, all was usually forgiven. The magic was just too potent. Then came 1955, and perhaps her single most iconic image, The 7-Year Itch. Directed by Billy Wilder, the film featured Marilyn as the girl upstairs, the innocent temptation for a married man whose wife is away for the summer. And then there's the scene, standing over a New York subway grate, the gust of wind from a passing train billowing her white halter dress up around her thighs. That image, it's fused into the very DNA of American pop culture. Ask anyone, anywhere, they know that white dress moment. It encapsulates the playful, irresistible sexuality that made Marilyn Monroe a global obsession. The ascent was complete. She wasn't just a movie star anymore. She was Marilyn Monroe, a name synonymous with Hollywood legend. Reaching the pinnacle of Hollywood fame didn't mean smooth sailing for Marilyn. In fact, her biggest battles were arguably just beginning. While the public adored her, behind the studio gates, she faced increasing friction. 20th Century Fox, happy with their box office goldmine, wanted to keep her firmly typecast in those lucrative, dumb, blonde comedic roles. Think Lorelei Lee on repeat. Marilyn, however, yearned for more. She craved respect as a serious actress, longed for challenging dramatic parts that would allow her to showcase her range, not just her figure. The studio saw a profitable commodity. She saw an artist trapped in a gilded cage. Adding insult to injury was the issue of pay. Despite being one of Fox's biggest earners, her original 1950 contract meant she was paid significantly less than other stars of comparable stature, and she had little to no say in her projects. Fox wanted her to churn out films like Pink Tights. She wanted scripts with substance. The studio wanted compliance. She demanded artistic control. The battle lines were drawn. Then there was the relentless pressure of fame itself. Marilyn was now arguably the most famous woman in the world. Every move she made, every outfit she wore, every relationship she had was dissected under the harsh glare of the media spotlight. Privacy became a forgotten luxury. Imagine not being able to go to the grocery store or walk down the street without causing a mob scene or ending up as tabloid fodder. Even taking out the trash could become front-page news if a paparazzo was lurking. This constant scrutiny exacerbated her already significant anxieties and insecurities. And remember those nude calendar photos from 1949? In 1952, as her star was rising rapidly, the story broke. It could have been a career-ending scandal in the puritanical 50s. How did Marilyn handle it? With astonishing, disarming honesty. When confronted by the press, instead of denying or deflecting, she famously admitted, "Yes, I posed. I was broke and needed the money." Asked what she had on during the shoot, she allegedly quipped, "The radio." That candor, that refusal to be ashamed of her past or her choices made out of necessity, turned a potential disaster into a public relations coup. The public, far from being scandalized, seemed to admire her frankness. It made her seem more human, more relatable. But the frustrations with Fox continued to mount. Fed up with the restrictive contract, the low pay, and the lack of creative input, Marilyn did something virtually unheard of for a major star at the time, especially a female one. In late 1954, after finishing The 7-Year Itch, she walked out on her contract and fled Hollywood. Where did she go? To the perceived antithesis of Hollywood glamour, New York City. Her goal? To study serious acting. Can you imagine the guts that took? To abandon the very system that made her famous, risk her entire career, and immerse herself in the intellectually rigorous world of method acting. She enrolled in the legendary Actors Studio, studying under Lee Strasberg, the high priest of the method. She sat in classes alongside serious stage actors, analyzing scripts, doing scene work, trying to strip away the Marilyn persona and find the authentic actress underneath. Anyone who thought she wasn't serious about her craft had their answer right there. Not content with just studying, she took another audacious step. In 1955, with her friend photographer Milton H. Greene, she formed her own independent production company, Marilyn Monroe Productions. This was revolutionary. In an era when studios held all the power, Marilyn was demanding control over her own films, her scripts, her directors, her career. She wasn't just asking to be taken seriously, she was seizing the means of production. Marilyn Monroe Productions was her declaration of independence, her way of saying, "I am not just a blonde bombshell. I am an artist and I will have a voice." This period of rebellion forced Fox back to the negotiating table. In 1956, they hammered out a new contract that was much more favorable to Marilyn. It granted her higher pay, script approval, director approval, and the right to make one independent film with Marilyn Monroe Productions for every film she made for Fox. It was a major victory, demonstrating her considerable clout and changing the power dynamics between stars and studios. Her time at the Actors Studio profoundly influenced her approach to acting. She became deeply committed to finding the emotional truth of her characters, sometimes to the point of obsession. This newfound dedication was evident in her subsequent performances. In Bus Stop 1956, her first film under the new Fox contract, she played Cherie, a vulnerable, slightly naive saloon singer with dreams of escaping her past. Critics were impressed, noting a new depth and pathos in her performance. Joshua Logan, the director, praised her work, though acknowledged the challenges of her method approach. Similarly, The Prince and the Showgirl 1957, the first Marilyn Monroe Productions production, showcased her comedic timing but also revealed on-set tensions between the classically trained Olivier and the method-driven, insecure Marilyn. Olivier famously found her difficult, while she felt intimidated and unsupported. Preparing for these roles involved intense emotional excavation. She would delve deep into her own experiences, her own pain, to connect with her characters. Friends and colleagues described her agonizing over lines, searching for motivation, often paralyzed by insecurity and fear of failure. It wasn't just acting anymore. It was living the role, sometimes to a detrimental extent. Lee Strasberg, however, saw genius amidst the struggle. He famously declared Marilyn one of the two most talented actors he had ever worked with at the studio. "The first is Brando," he reportedly said. "The second is Marilyn Monroe." High praise indeed, validating her decision to fight for artistic respect. She had proven she was more than just a pretty face. She was a rebel with a cause, battling the system and her own demons to be recognized as a true artist. So what was it about Marilyn Monroe that captivated the world and continues to hold sway decades after her death? It goes far beyond just being beautiful or famous. Her enduring appeal lies in a unique, almost paradoxical combination of elements that defined her artistic style and reshaped Hollywood. First and foremost was that incredible blend of overt, almost cartoonish sexuality and a palpable, heart-wrenching vulnerability. She could project sizzling allure one moment, the breathy voice, the sleepy eyes, the body that seemed poured into her clothes, and then, with just a flicker in her gaze or a tremor in her voice, reveal a profound sadness, a childlike lostness that made you want to protect her. Think about Lorelei Lee in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. She's mercenary and calculating, yet somehow retains an air of wide-eyed innocence. Or Sugar Kane in Some Like It Hot 1959, devastatingly sexy, but also deeply wounded and yearning for genuine love. This duality was key. She could look like a goddess of love, but her eyes often held the melancholy of a lonely child. It made her irresistible and deeply human simultaneously. And let's talk about her comedic talent, especially in those dumb blonde roles she often chafed against. It's easy to dismiss them as simple typecasting, but playing that kind of character effectively requires incredible skill. Marilyn didn't just play dumb, she elevated it to an art form. Her timing was exquisite, her delivery pitch perfect. She understood the inherent humor in the persona, the naive pronouncements, the wide-eyed misunderstandings, and delivered them with a wink and a sparkle that let the audience in on the joke. Watch her in How to Marry a Millionaire or Some Like It Hot. That seemingly effortless dumbness demands sharp intelligence and precise comedic instincts. She took a stereotype and infused it with charm, vulnerability, and undeniable star power. Her voice was another signature element. That soft, breathy, slightly hesitant delivery, it was instantly recognizable and endlessly debated. Was it natural? Was it cultivated? Probably a bit of both. It conveyed both intimacy and innocence, adding another layer to her complex persona. Her voice sounded like it was filtered through honey and moonlight. You heard it, and you were instantly captivated. It could be seductive, childlike, or heartbreaking, sometimes all within the same scene. Beyond her on-screen presence, Marilyn's impact on the film industry was significant. She fundamentally changed the mold of the female Hollywood star. Before, her bombshells were often portrayed as tough, worldly wise dames. Marilyn introduced a softer, more vulnerable kind of sex appeal that resonated deeply with post-war audiences. Furthermore, her bold move in forming Marilyn Monroe Productions and fighting 20th Century Fox for creative control and better pay was groundbreaking. In an era where studios dictated every aspect of a star's career, she demanded agency. She battled the monolithic studio system, and while the fight took its toll, her success paved the way for future actors, male and female, to negotiate better terms, seek creative input, and even form their own production companies. She wasn't just a pawn in their game. She flipped the board and demanded to be a player. She fought the giants, and even if she didn't win every battle, she fundamentally shifted the landscape for those who came after her. And of course, her influence as a fashion and beauty icon is undeniable and everlasting. The platinum blonde hair, the red lips, the beauty mark, the hourglass figure celebrated in curve-hugging dresses, these became indelible parts of 20th century visual culture. How many trends have come and gone, yet the Marilyn look remains. Instantly recognizable, endlessly imitated, a timeless shorthand for glamour and allure. She wasn't just following fashion, she became fashion, connecting this back to our central theme, that lifelong search for love and acceptance. Her career provides a fascinating, often tragic paradox. She achieved global fame, the adoration of millions. She was desired, celebrated, imitated. Yet, did this massive success bring her the genuine acceptance and unconditional love she craved? Or did it trap her even more firmly within the Marilyn Monroe image, making it harder for people to see the real Norma Jeane underneath? The very fame she sought often seemed to isolate her further. The iconic roles like Lorelei Lee or the girl in the 7-Year Itch represent the peak of the bombshell image she crafted. While later films like Bus Stop or the deeply personal The Misfits reveal her desperate struggle to break free from that mold and be recognized for her depth. As one critic or cultural historian might put it, she was a paradox. Both the perfect product of the Hollywood system and its most famous rebel. She was undeniably more than just a pretty face. She was a complex artist, a reluctant revolutionary, and a cultural force whose impact is still felt today. If Marilyn's career was a roller coaster, her personal life was arguably even more tumultuous, marked by intense passions, heartbreaking disappointments, and a relentless search for the kind of stable, unconditional love that had eluded her in childhood. Her marriages, in particular, became public spectacles, each reflecting a different facet of her desires and struggles. First, there was James Dougherty. They married in 1942, when Norma Jeane was just 16. This wasn't a grand romance, it was largely a marriage of convenience, arranged by her then guardian Grace Goddard, primarily to prevent Norma Jeane from having to return to an orphanage or another uncertain foster home when Grace and her husband moved away. Doherty was a neighbor, a few years older, soon heading off to the Merchant Marine during the war. It provided stability, a roof over her head, but little else. As Norma Jeane began her modeling career and the transformation into Marilyn Monroe started, the marriage quickly dissolved. He represented the life she was leaving behind. Doherty later lamented that fame took his wife, saying the Marilyn persona essentially killed the Norma Jeane he knew. Their divorce was finalized in 1946. Just as her Hollywood journey was beginning, you could say her first husband was like an escape hatch from an unhappy childhood, but ultimately, that particular ship wasn't destined for a happy harbor. Then came the marriage that seemed like a fairy tale made in Hollywood heaven. Marilyn Monroe, the ultimate movie goddess, marrying Joe DiMaggio, the legendary New York Yankees baseball hero Joltin' Joe. They wed in a frenzy of publicity at San Francisco City Hall in January 1954. He was the quiet, stoic American icon. She was the effervescent, sensual screen siren. The public was captivated, but behind the flashbulbs, the union was fraught with tension almost from the start. DiMaggio, intensely private and traditional, reportedly struggled with Marilyn's overwhelming fame and her overtly sexual image. He wanted a wife who stayed home. She was the most sought-after woman on the planet. Can you imagine the clash? He allegedly bristled at the crowds that swarmed her, famously remarking with seeming bewilderment, "I don't know what they see in her." The infamous subway grate scene for The 7-Year Itch, filmed publicly in New York, reportedly infuriated DiMaggio, leading to a major argument. The passion was undeniable, but so were the fundamental incompatibilities and his reported jealousy and possessiveness. The fairy tale imploded after just 9 months. Marilyn tearfully announced their divorce in October 1954, citing mental cruelty. It was a classic Hollywood tragedy, two icons colliding, generating sparks but ultimately unable to coexist. Her third marriage seemed like a deliberate turn away from the Hollywood glare. In 1956, she married Arthur Miller, the acclaimed playwright, a celebrated intellectual figure, author of Death of a Salesman and The Crucible. This union seemed to promise the depth, respect, and intellectual connection Marilyn craved. She converted to Judaism before the wedding, embracing his world. For a time, they appeared to be the perfect blend of brains and beauty, the intellectual meeting the goddess. She hoped Miller would see beyond the image, validating her intelligence and artistic aspirations. They retreated to a farmhouse in Connecticut, seeking a semblance of normal life. However, this marriage too eventually crumbled under immense pressure. Marilyn suffered devastating miscarriages, deepening her existing emotional fragility. Miller struggled with her insecurities, her increasing reliance on pills, and the demands of her fame. He famously wrote the screenplay for The Misfits, 1961, her final completed film, which starred Marilyn in a role that seemed to painfully mirror her own vulnerabilities and their disintegrating relationship. Working together on set became an emotional minefield. Friends observed that the very differences that initially drew them together, his intellectualism, her intuitive emotionalism, ultimately created friction rather than harmony. They divorced in early 1961. Beyond her marriages, Marilyn's name was constantly linked with other famous men. The most persistent and controversial rumors involved President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. Whispers of affairs, particularly with JFK, reached a fever pitch after her sultry rendition of Happy Birthday. for the president at Madison Square Garden in May 1962. While concrete proof remains elusive, buried under decades of speculation and conflicting accounts, the alleged involvement with the powerful Kennedy brothers added another layer of intrigue and potential danger to her already complicated life. Whether fact or fiction, these rumors certainly contributed to the sense of drama and tragedy surrounding her final months. Amidst the romantic turmoil, Marilyn did form some deep and lasting friendships. Alan Whitey Snyder was her loyal makeup, artist from her earliest Fox days until her death, a constant supportive presence. She grew very close to Lee Strasberg and his wife Paula, who became surrogate parental figures, particularly during her time in New York. There's also the heartwarming story of her friendship with legendary jazz singer Ella Fitzgerald. In the mid-50s, the prestigious Mocambo nightclub was hesitant to book Ella due to racial prejudice. Marilyn, a huge fan, reportedly called the owner and promised to sit ringside every single night if they booked Ella, knowing her presence would guarantee massive press coverage. The owner agreed. Marilyn kept her word, and Ella's career reached new heights. It showed a loyalty and willingness to use her star power for others. Yet, even friendships could be complex. Friends often described being with Marilyn as riding an emotional roller coaster, exhilarating highs, devastating lows, but never ever boring. She could be generous and warm, but also demanding and consumed by her own anxieties. She relied heavily on those around her, yet often felt profoundly isolated. In her relentless search for love, even platonic connections were often fraught with intensity and need. Beneath the dazzling smile and the glamorous facade, Marilyn waged a constant, exhausting internal war. Her struggles were multifaceted, encompassing physical pain, deep-seated psychological issues, and the crushing weight of her own iconic image. One significant, often overlooked source of suffering was her health. Marilyn battled severe endometriosis, a painful condition where uterine tissue grows outside the uterus. This caused chronic pelvic pain, debilitating cramps, and likely contributed to her difficulties carrying a pregnancy to term. She suffered multiple miscarriages, including a heartbreaking ectopic pregnancy during her marriage to Arthur Miller. Each loss was a devastating blow, compounding her feelings of inadequacy and failure, particularly in an era when motherhood was seen as a primary female role. Imagine the irony. Her body, adored and objectified by the world, was simultaneously a source of intense private pain and reproductive tragedy. Compounding her physical ailments were profound psychological struggles rooted in her traumatic childhood. The instability, the lack of consistent love, the feeling of abandonment, these experiences left deep scars. She suffered from chronic insomnia, often unable to quiet her racing thoughts without medication. Anxiety and depression were constant. Companions, sometimes manifesting as crippling stage fright or debilitating insecurity on set. That deep-seated fear of being abandoned, of not being good enough, never truly left her. It fueled her relentless drive for success and adoration, yet also made it impossible for her to ever truly feel secure or loved, no matter how famous she became. To cope with the insomnia, anxiety, and physical pain, Marilyn became increasingly dependent on prescription drugs. Barbiturates like Nembutal and Seconal helped her sleep, while amphetamines provided the energy needed to face the demanding schedules and pressures of stardom. This dangerous cocktail of uppers and downers, often prescribed by multiple doctors, seemingly unaware of what others were giving her, created a precarious cycle of dependency. The very medications meant to help her cope were pulling her further into a spiral of addiction and emotional instability. She was fighting invisible demons, and the battle was often fiercer than any demanding movie role. Adding to this toxic mix was a profound internal conflict regarding her own identity. She desperately wanted to be loved and accepted for who she really was, the intelligent, sensitive Norma Jeane beneath the makeup. Yet she was trapped by the overwhelming power of the Marilyn Monroe persona she herself had helped create. She yearned to be taken seriously as an actress, to tackle complex dramatic roles, but felt constantly pulled back by the public's insatiable appetite for the blonde bombshell. It was a cruel catch-22. She simultaneously wanted to escape the shadow of Marilyn Monroe, while also terrified of losing the adoration and identity that came with it. Could Norma Jeane survive without Marilyn? Could Marilyn ever allow Norma Jeane to emerge? This internal tug-of-war was a source of immense anguish. Isn't it the ultimate Hollywood irony? The woman desired by millions, the embodiment of glamour and success, felt fundamentally lonely, insecure, and unworthy of love. It's a stark reminder that fame and adoration are no substitutes for genuine self-acceptance and stable, loving relationships. Hollywood truly is a bizarre place. In her later years, the strain began to show, even through the carefully maintained facade. While the platinum hair was always impeccable, the makeup flawless, photographs sometimes revealed a weariness in her eyes, a tension around her smile. The vibrant energy seemed dimmed at times, replaced by a fragile vulnerability. It was as if the mask was slipping, revealing glimpses of the exhausted, struggling woman beneath. Yet, amidst the chaos, Marilyn sought solace in simple, relatable pleasures. Few people knew she was an avid reader with a surprisingly extensive personal library, filled with works by serious authors like Joyce, Whitman, and Camus. She enjoyed poetry, even writing some herself, poignant verses revealing her inner turmoil and longing. She also reportedly enjoyed cooking, trying out new recipes, perhaps seeking a sense of domestic normalcy that often eluded her. There's a famous story and photos of her attempting a complex fish dish from a cookbook in her New York apartment. These small moments, curled up with a book, scribbling in a notebook, puttering in the kitchen, offered glimpses of Norma Jeane, the person seeking quietude and ordinary comforts away from the blinding glare of the spotlight. They were attempts, however fleeting, to find a sense of normalcy, a connection to the simple things in an utterly extraordinary and often overwhelming life. A diary entry or letter from this period might capture this sentiment, something like, "I feel like I'm playing a part all the time, even off screen. I don't know where Norma Jeane ends and Marilyn begins anymore. Sometimes I just want to be invisible." Marilyn's private life wasn't just a backdrop to her career. It was punctuated by significant events that both shaped her and revealed the complexities of her character to the world, often blurring the lines between the personal and the public. 1. Profoundly impactful experience occurred far from Hollywood in February 1954, shortly after her whirlwind marriage to Joe DiMaggio. While on their honeymoon trip, which included a stop in Japan, Marilyn took a detour alone to Korea. The Korean War had recently ended in an armistice, and she agreed to perform for the American troops still stationed there. Over 4 days, she put on 10 shows for an estimated 100,000 servicemen, performing outdoors in freezing weather, often in flimsy showgirl outfits. The soldiers adored her. Their enthusiastic, overwhelming reception seemed to touch her deeply. She later described it as the first time she truly felt loved for herself, not just as a movie star image. Standing before those cheering crowds of young men, so far from home, perhaps for the first time, she didn't feel like an object or a commodity, but like someone genuinely bringing joy and connection. It was a rare moment where the external adoration seemed to align with her internal need for acceptance, offering a glimpse of the validation she so desperately sought. Fast forward to 1960 and the set of The Misfits. This film was freighted with personal significance. The screenplay was written by her then-husband, Arthur Miller, during the death throes of their marriage. Her co-stars were screen legends Clark Gable and Montgomery Clift, both grappling with their own serious health issues. The production, filmed under the grueling Nevada desert sun, became a crucible of personal and professional turmoil for Marilyn. Her health, both physical and mental, was deteriorating. Her reliance on pills for sleep and anxiety was escalating. She was chronically late to set, sometimes unable to work at all, requiring numerous takes and often clashing with director John Huston. The character Miller wrote for her, Rosalind Tabor, was a deeply sensitive, recently divorced woman adrift in a world of emotionally damaged men, a character that mirrored Marilyn's own fragility and disillusionment with painful accuracy. Filming The Misfits was like watching her personal tragedies play out in public under the guise of making a movie. The strain was evident on screen. Her performance is raw, vulnerable, and hauntingly beautiful. But the toll it took was immense. It foreshadowed the darkness gathering around her. Then came May 19, 1962, perhaps her last truly iconic public appearance. At a massive birthday celebration for President John F. Kennedy at Madison Square Garden, Marilyn, sewn into a breathtakingly sheer, rhinestone-encrusted Jean Louis gown, stepped into the spotlight. After a playfully teasing introduction, she delivered a rendition of "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" that became instantly legendary. Her performance was intimate, sultry, almost unbearably seductive. That breathy voice, the shimmering dress clinging to her famous curves, it was pure Marilyn magic, the ultimate bombshell moment. But beneath the glamour, it was also fraught with tension and fueled the already rampant rumors of an affair with the president. It was a dazzling display, but in hindsight, it feels like a final, brilliant flare before the darkness closed in. A performance both captivating and tinged with an almost unbearable sense of impending tragedy. Beyond these high-profile moments, glimpses of her daily life reveal her attempts to create stability. She cherished her pets, particularly her little Maltese terrier, Maff. Photos show her cuddling Maff, suggesting the simple comfort animals can provide. She tried to establish homes. The Connecticut farmhouse with Miller, her apartment on East 57th Street in New York, the Brentwood hacienda she bought in early 1962, her first real home purchased entirely on her own. These spaces were filled with books, art, attempts to create a sanctuary. Friends would describe moments of normalcy. Marilyn cooking spaghetti, laughing at a joke, playing with Maff, curled up reading. Yet the underlying fragility was always there. Anecdotes from friends often paint a picture of unpredictable moods. She could be incredibly warm and generous one moment, then retreat into silence or erupt in anger over a perceived slight the next. One friend might recount a story where she threw a tantrum over something seemingly minor, revealing the immense pressure cooker of emotions simmering beneath the surface. These weren't necessarily acts of malice, but perhaps cracks in the carefully constructed facade, moments where the pain and anxiety became too much to contain. These events, the validation in Korea, the public breakdown during the Misfits, the dazzling danger of the happy birthday performance, the quiet moments with her dog, are all puzzle pieces. They illustrate her ongoing quest for love and acceptance, the devastating toll when relationships failed, the complexities of navigating power and desire, and the constant struggle to find peace within herself. So what happens after the final curtain call? For Marilyn Monroe, death at the tragically young age of 36 wasn't an ending, but a transformation into something eternal. Her legacy isn't just that of a movie star. She became, and remains, an indelible icon, Woven into the very fabric of global pop culture, her influence stretches far beyond the silver screen, touching art, music, fashion, and our ongoing conversations about fame, beauty, and femininity. Think about it. How many other stars from the 1950s remain instantly recognizable to people of all ages today? Marilyn's image is ubiquitous. Andy Warhol captured her vibrant, repetitive power in his famous silkscreens, turning her face into a symbol of mass media and celebrity itself. Musicians from Elton John to Madonna have paid homage, referencing her glamour, her vulnerability, or her tragic trajectory. Fashion designers constantly revisit her style, the wiggle dresses, the capri pants, that iconic white halter dress. Her image sells everything from perfume to coffee mugs. From Warhol's canvases to Lady Gaga's red carpet looks, Marilyn's ghost lingers, a persistent benchmark for glamour, fame, and often poignant tragedy. Her impact on perceptions of femininity and sexuality is complex and still debated. Was she a revolutionary figure who celebrated female sensuality in a repressed era? Or was she a victim of Hollywood exploitation, forever trapped by the male gaze and the dumb blonde stereotype she both perfected and resented? The truth, as always with Marilyn, is likely somewhere in between. She simultaneously reinforced certain feminine ideals while subtly challenging others through her ambition, her business acumen, and her raw vulnerability, which often undercut the purely sexual. Objectification. She remains a Rorschach test for our views on women, power, and image. Different people look at her and see vastly different things: empowerment, victimhood, artistic struggle, manufactured illusion. Within the film industry itself, while debates about the depth of her acting talent continued long after her death, her undeniable screen presence and charisma are undisputed. Films like Some Like It Hot, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and The 7-Year Itch remain beloved classics, largely due to her luminous performances. And her formation of Marilyn Monroe Productions stands as a significant, if often overlooked, contribution to actors' rights, asserting artistic control in a studio-dominated era. You could say she crashed Hollywood's party, rewrote some of the rules, dazzled everyone, and left far too soon. But her legacy keeps dancing in the cultural spotlight, bold, beautiful, and challenging. And thankfully, no more pies seem to be involved, unlike some co-star experiences. Her iconic moments, the diamonds, the subway grate, are instant cultural touchstones. And what about that central theme, her lifelong search for love and acceptance? Ironically, it might be her very vulnerability, her perceived flaws, and that ultimately unfulfilled quest that makes her so enduringly relatable and haunting. The perfect, untouchable goddess image is compelling, but it's the visible cracks in the facade, the glimpses of Norma Jeane's longing and insecurity beneath the Marilyn gloss, that truly connect with audiences generation after generation. Perhaps it's precisely because her search remained tragically unfinished that we feel such a strange, protective intimacy towards her. As a modern critic might observe, Marilyn Monroe wasn't just a star. She was a dream, a tragedy, and an eternal icon of American culture, made unforgettable by the very humanity she struggled to protect. The immense sums paid for her personal effects at auctions, millions for a dress she wore once, aren't just about celebrity worship. They speak to the potent, almost mythical power her story continues to hold. The legend, it seems, is very much real and incredibly valuable. Marilyn's death on August 5, 1962, ruled a probable suicide due to a barbiturate overdose, sent shockwaves around the world. The sudden loss of such a vibrant, globally adored figure at just 36 was incomprehensible to many. It froze her image. In time, Forever young, beautiful, and at the peak of her fame, but it also ignited decades of speculation and conspiracy theories. While the official cause remains unchanged, whispers involving the Kennedys, the mafia, or accidental overdose persist, adding a layer of unresolved mystery to her already dramatic life story. We won't dive deep into those theories here. The focus remains on the woman and her impact. But the tragic circumstances of her death undoubtedly cemented her status as a near-mythical figure, forever enigmatic. In the years following her passing, the recognition that sometimes eluded her in life began to pour in. While she won a Golden Globe for Some Like It Hot, major acting awards largely bypassed her during her career. Posthumously, however, her talent and influence have been widely acknowledged through countless retrospectives, critical reappraisals, and lifetime achievement honors bestowed upon her legacy. History, it seems, finally gave her the artistic respect she so deeply craved. Her life story continues to fascinate. Innumerable biographies, documentaries, feature films, and even stage plays have attempted to capture her essence, explore her complexities, and unravel the enigma of Marilyn Norma Jeane. Museums exhibit her gowns and personal belongings. Her photos are constantly reproduced. Her final resting place at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles remains a site of pilgrimage for fans from across the globe, leaving flowers and tokens of affection decades later. She isn't just remembered, she is actively engaged, reinterpreted and kept alive in the cultural conversation. So what's the final takeaway from the whirlwind life of Marilyn Monroe? Was she the ultimate blonde bombshell, a misunderstood artist, a victim of the Hollywood machine, a casualty of her own insecurities and troubled past? Perhaps she was all of these things and more. Her story is a potent cocktail of ambition, talent, vulnerability, exploitation, and resilience. It's a cautionary tale about the perils of fame, but also a testament to the enduring power of a unique star who fought to define herself against overwhelming odds. And now, back to you. After hearing her story, what do you think defines Marilyn Monroe? Was she primarily an icon, a victim, a talented actress, or something else entirely? Share your perspectives in the comments below. We're eager to hear your thoughts. Want to revisit some of her magic? We highly recommend checking out Some Like It Hot for pure comedic genius, or Gentlemen Prefer Blondes for that iconic bombshell charm. You won't be disappointed. If you found this deep dive into Marilyn's life fascinating, please hit that like button. It really helps us out. And make sure you subscribe to Hollywood Unveiled so you don't miss our next episode uncovering the secrets behind the stars. If you're really digging what we do, consider supporting the channel on Patreon. Every contribution helps us keep digging up and sharing these incredible Hollywood stories. We'll leave you with a quote often attributed to Marilyn herself, one that perhaps captures both her ambition and her vulnerability. "I don't want to make money. I just want to be wonderful. By any measure, wonderful she was, and wonderful she remains."